The AT&T teleconferencing service. Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound. Enter your attendee ID number followed by pound. Your line has been muted. Press *6 to unmute your own line.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Let me just begin with a couple of thank yous. I want to start with Kim Bowie and her team for a terrific week of storytelling and pieces of hope and inspiration for our Champions for Change series this week that'll culminate in a special hour tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. It's a difficult time in this country and the world, and Kim and her team have brought us some incredible stories, so thank you to them. I also want to thank and congratulate the team that put on last night's drive-in town hall. Not even COVID-19 can stop this team, and the ingenuity that was shown was terrific. I want to particularly thank Kate Lunger and Alexa Benowitz and their special events team for all they did, and Guy Pepper and Reza Bakhtar for all of the staging and direction and their teams, and of course Eric Sherling and his entire editorial team, along with Mark Preston, who booked the event and made that happen. So to everybody, thank you for an incredibly successful night. Obviously, there is a ton going on, and I do think that with a lot of it, it's going to require us to step back and put a lot of this in context, because there are just broad themes about politics and science, and as Michael has been telling us all week about the administration not publishing materials and the Attorney General and a step back on his views. And I do think what the FBI director testified to yesterday on many fronts is incredibly important. So there are a lot of threads to follow here. Let's start with the latest on COVID and Matthew.
Hi, good morning, Jeff. It's Laura today.
Oh, Laura. Sorry, yes, Laura.
That's okay, no problem. Let me start with the big headlines. The United States is poised to hit a grim milestone over the weekend of 200,000 deaths, and globally there are over 30 million cases. First, last month, there was a lot of concern over the changes to the CDC guidelines on who should be tested. A source confirms to CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta that those guidelines did not go through the normal approval process. There is an extensive review process in place that was bypassed. The New York Times has some additional details in their story, which we have approved for attribution. And also remember that the CDC Director Redfield said earlier this week that there will be a revision and clarification, and that yes, you should test asymptomatic patients. We have Sanjay Gupta and Elizabeth Cohen available on this. Also, the CDC released yesterday a new ensemble forecast, which has the death total by October 10th up to 218,000 deaths, which represents a little bit of a slowdown, but a slight increase from the previous prediction last week of 217,000 deaths by October 10th. On vaccines, according to a new study from Pew, clearly the American public has some major trust issues. But there has been a big drop since May on whether or not Americans would definitely or probably get a vaccine. It went from 51% to 72% to 51%. And 3/4 of Americans worry that the vaccine will be approved before safety and effectiveness are fully understood. This comes last night during the CNN town hall. You had Vice President Biden saying, I don't trust the presidents on vaccines. I trust Dr. Fauci. If Dr. Fauci says the vaccine is safe, I would take it. At the same time last night in the dueling rally, which will be talked about later, President Trump said that they're doing great with vaccines and therapeutics and that the numbers are down and it's much as no one can believe. But in reality, he was in Wisconsin, and yesterday, Wisconsin reported its single highest daily increase since the pandemic began, adding over 1,600 cases. Let me go first to wrap up some health headlines. We'll be monitoring a press conference today, a phone conference at 10:30 a.m. with HHS Secretary Alex Azar and CMS Administrator Seema Verma, which promises an important health announcement. We're working to confirm what that focus is. And you had Dr. Fauci yesterday on radio interviews saying he was warning Americans not to get complacent in that coronavirus remediation measures like wearing a mask and social distancing and remote work could blunt the double whammy of the flu and the coronavirus in the winter months ahead. As mentioned, we have Sanjay and Elizabeth available on health and vaccines. And getting back to where we are right now, in the new daily cases on the CNN map, you are seeing 30 states with an uptick this week, 16 steady and just 4 down in the week-to-week average. There were over 44,000 new cases yesterday and 870 reported deaths. The U.S. daily average is going between 800 and 900 deaths a day, and it's starting to climb again. We're hovering around 40,000 new cases each week, and that's up 13% week over week. The U.S. positivity rate stands at 5.35%, with 10 states above 10%. And as we previously mentioned, Wisconsin, there were some other superlatives yesterday, with Georgia passing 300,000 cases, becoming the 5th state to do so, and Texas surpassing 700,000 cases as more reopenings were revealed. We also learned that a fan who attended last week's Kansas City Chiefs game that allowed fans tested positive the day after, and that 10 people are in quarantine. And we're monitoring Canada, which has seen a doubling in less than a month of cases. We have Bryn Gingras who can handle these headlines from New York today. And really importantly on schools, just 3 days before schools were scheduled to open in the largest school district in the United States in New York City on Monday, there's a 2-week delay. You'll see a slow reopening headed towards October 1st when middle school and high school students return. And at the same time, a study released yesterday showed that up to 52% of school employees are at risk for COVID due to what are the CDC outlined risk factors like obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. It's a risk for both school exposure and also within household transmission. We're monitoring different closures and quarantines. Yesterday revealed Providence College issued a stay-at-home order after 80 students tested positive in just 2 days. We have Brianna Godriga available from New York on the education headlines. And for the wrap packages today, you have Erica Hill, 4, 6, and 8, and Nick Watt, 5, 7, and 9. And I'll pause there.
Okay, look, I think that these wrap packages are unbelievably important today because there are so many developments. And I do think that we need to be looking closely at the map and where the cases are going up. It's a much bleaker map as we approach 200,000 deaths this weekend. And I do think that number has to be front and center in what we're facing. So many little headlines from the schools, to the Kansas City Chiefs thing, to up and down. And then I just think that the CDC story and the guidelines and the politics of that, it requires actually a Washington reporter or out of the CDC in Georgia, but to tell this story as a reported piece. I'm gonna move to Washington now and COVID, please.
Okay, so obviously this continuing science versus Trump. as Laura mentioned, these New York Times reporting that these guidelines came from the HHS, and the CDC was not aware and did not review them as they're supposed to be. And then, this comes on top of this lead COVID task force, former aide to Pence, Olivia Troy, slamming Trump for failing to protect the American people because he only cared about getting reelected. This 2-minute video just devastating about him talking about not shaking hands with those disgusting people. And, she is one of this is a in real time person speaking out about what's going on and just painting this devastating picture of how COVID was being handled. In terms of early voting, this obviously, as Trump continues to just hammer on the rigged election, voting starts today in several states. This incredible language from the federal judge yesterday, scathing words saying that these UPS charges were politically motivated, an intentional effort to disrupt the election. And the Washington Post is reporting this abandoning plan for the United States Postal Service to distribute 650 million masks by the White House because there was concern that it would look bad or create panic. And then also on voting, these big developments in the key state of Pennsylvania about absentee ballots and the Green Party being added. On the stimulus bill, that is heating up again in light of these economic numbers and the economy seeming not so strong. Trump in the town hall basically said he would deal with Pelosi. Now the ball is in her court, and she's got to figure out whether she's going to deal with him or stick to the $2.2 trillion. Last phone call was supposedly from Pelosi to Mnuchin saying, "Call me when he gets to $2.2 trillion." And he leaves. David can talk about the back and forth on the town halls on the politics, but Trump does have a 7:00 rally in Minnesota tonight, and that's what I got on COVID.
Okay, look, I do think that we should put together what happened with the CDC and the politics of the CDC guidelines with the politics of what happened with the Postal Service wanting to send out all the masks, and that was killed by politics too. I just think there's too many things right now of politics interceding in science, and we've got to put them all together in segments and pieces. They come together. International COVID.
So within that headline Laura mentioned of 30 million global cases, the fact the number increased by 10 million in just over a month really does capture the recent worrying surge in all areas of the world. The US, India and Brazil still account for more than 50% of that total, but the World Health Organization is still warning about these surges in Europe. So I'll start in Europe. In the UK, the traditional New Year's Eve fireworks display has already been cancelled for this year to prevent crowds congregating in the city centre. Interesting because of the comments London's Mayor Sadiq Khan made around that announcement, basically saying that, lockdowns may well be coming to London as the numbers of case numbers in England soared 167% in the last month. And hospital admissions are also doubling every 8 days. The health secretary said he does not rule out another national lockdown to stop the spread, but that is his quote, the last line of defence. So Scott McLean can pull together all the stuff from the UK, but also bouncing into the bigger European fears. In Israel, that's already started its second national lockdown. As we've said this week, the first country to do that. That started at 7 a.m. Eastern. The 3-week lockdown includes the closure of many businesses, strict limits on public gatherings, and it's largely going to confine people to within a kilometre, about a half a mile of their homes. So the closure also coincided with the Jewish high holidays, when people are traditionally visiting their families and gathering for large prayer services. So Oren Lieberman will be covering all aspects of that. COVID-related from China, the outgoing United States ambassador there, Terry Banter, has slammed Beijing's initial handling of the virus, saying what could have been contained in Wuhan ended up becoming a worldwide pandemic. He blamed the Chinese system for the cover-up and for penalizing local doctors who highlighted the virus at the very outset. So, look, while unsurprising that Banstead would sort of have that White House sort of Trump line on hitting China, it's still a very, very forceful condemnation of the country coming from, the chief diplomat there. And so David Culver has the only TV interview with Banstead, and the New York Times were also interviewing, but we're the only ones who've got that on tape. And there's all that is in the system. In New Zealand recorded its first virus-free day in 5 weeks and is now going to reevaluate current social distancing guidelines there. They'll look at that next week. Friday also marked the fourth consecutive day without any cases of community transmission, and all recent cases have been found to be from quarantined travellers returning from abroad. So look, it's just a sort of a bright spot amid all the other gloom, and we've got flips filed on that story, and we're going to be doing a fuller breakout on New Zealand for next week. In South Africa, we talked yesterday about how the country was preparing to reopen for business, but now it has to confront rampant COVID corruption. More than 700 companies are under investigation following allegations that government officials skimmed off money from contracts totaling more than $400 million. So government corruption, look, it's nothing new in South Africa to have government corruption. There's been decades of it, but the startling levels reached during the pandemic has now really led to this kind of moment of national reckoning for the ruling ANC party. So Dave McKenzie's got a really good sort of look at that story. And then finally, in Mexico, sort of the headline is, the mariachi bands go silent, but there's a much more serious note to this story. The traditional staples at every wedding party or social gathering, the COVID restrictions have killed off all music, but the livelihood of musicians across the country. But it's just a colourful way to tell what is a serious story of Mexico's impending economic hardship. More than 53% of the country's economy relies on the informal sector, musicians and tradespeople and markets, etc. So it is really, really being clobbered. So although, LATAM economies are due to be down 10%, Mexico is going to be very, very severely hardly hit. So Matt Rivers takes a look at that through the eyes of the mariachi bands, and that's kind of a nice piece too. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. And I would also say that I thought Fauci's comments overnight about Australia and the lack of flu there, meaning that there might not be a wave of flu and COVID in the United States this winter, I think are really interesting and worth discussing with Sanjay. Business.
Jeff, good morning. Investors on this Friday bracing for what is going to be a choppy session this following 2 straight days of decline, all on the Fed's dour outlook of the U.S. economic recovery. As we know, Saturday marks 6 months to the day since the first stay-at-home orders went into effect. The stock market somewhat recovered. Parts of the housing market are booming, but at the same time, the U.S. economy is down almost 12 million jobs. Service spending is at a fraction of where it was, and Americans continue to struggle with food and housing insecurity. Overnight, a World Bank economist predicting that the recovery could take as much as 5 years. And the bank also talked about rising income inequality. CNN Business's Charles E. Alcorn reporting on a new study this morning that billionaires like Bezos, Gates, and Zuckerberg shockingly raked in a whopping $845 billion in combined assets from March to September, growing their combined wealth by 29%. This as the pandemic ushered in the worst unemployment crisis since the Great Depression. That is up online right now. And of course, millions of Americans that are out of work are looking to DC for help, and talks remain tenuous, as Virginia just mentioned. Betsy Klein reporting that economic advisor Larry Kudlow saying he doesn't think another stimulus package is key to an economic recovery, but this clearly going against the grain and message of most economists and central banks, including Powell, as I just mentioned. Just out this morning, we just alerted from Christina Alessi that Goldman Sachs will likely downgrade their assessment of the U.S. economy if no further fiscal stimulus is introduced. And of course, this as progress seemed to be far-fetched, lawmakers leaving for the weekend. The big question now, obviously, is can Congress muster the political will to adopt another massive stimulus measure before the November election? Christine Romans and Christina Alessi are up and available on those threads, and that is where we get on COVID.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let me open it up for thoughts on COVID, please.
Hey, good morning, Jeff. It's Ben.
Sorry.
Please, go first.
I was just going to add, Jeff, to your point about looking at the CDC news and sort of the pressure and the Postal Service and the masks and the pressure. I just think an added element to that is, we should go back and look. I mean, we have to go back far for Olivia Troy or John Bolton, but people who have been in the Situation Room of the White House, who have been around the team, who come to the conclusion that everything is about his reelection and everything is about politics, is a good, just from people who have been at the table and in the rooms, to remind as a part of that piece as we look at those that pressure.
Okay, so Ben, I'll let you in 1 second. That's fine, David. But again, I think these two things are news today that we need to be putting together, and then we can broaden it out with your point of view as well. Go ahead, Ben.
So Virginia and Laura sort of touched on all of these, but I just wanted to underscore a couple of things. First, on the Postal Service, if you go back and you look at this actual document that was obtained, directly you see in this document, it says the first shipments are expected to reach U.S. households as early as April, and then it says XX. The date hasn't been filled in yet, but that just directly goes to show how early the administration knew that this would be a helpful thing and didn't do anything about it. Indirectly, how many lives obviously could have been saved if these masks were sent out and people did wear them and take it seriously as far back as April. Very quickly on the schools, study that Laura mentioned, I would encourage everyone to go back and take a look at a late night alert sent out by Maggie Fox last night, which really just has some incredible data in it as far as who exactly are the people in these schools who are at risk, both by the positions that they hold as well as the preconditions that they have. And then lastly, really quickly on the vaccine, the study that Laura mentioned showing just how many people don't trust the approval process. We could have a vaccine approved in, the near or medium term that is very, very effective, but if no one gets it, it doesn't matter because it won't protect anyone. And that, I think, is just something we should not get lost in the race for the vaccine.
Okay, anybody else? Anyone else on COVID? Okay, Laura, the rest of domestic, please.
Sure. So for the fires out west, there are 59 active fires, but there is rain in the forecast. The Dorado Fire, the one that was sparked by the botched gender reveal party over the Labor Day weekend, has killed one firefighter, according to the National Forest Service. Yosemite National Park was closed to visitors through the weekend due to poor air quality. We have a team of reporters covering this with Paul Verkammen and Josh Campbell in Southern California's Bobcat Fire and Miguel Marquez up in Oregon. We'll continue to monitor the cleanup and what is left from Sally's path through Florida and Alabama. You have the governor of Alabama touring destructions today through two towns. And nearly 1 week after the Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies were ambushed while sitting in their vehicle, detectives say they're making progress on identifying a suspect. You have the reward for the arrest of the suspect rising to over $600,000, and we have Sarah Seidner monitoring developments. And then also quickly in Louisville, you had the city council voting no confidence in the mayor on his handling of Breonna Taylor as we wait for a decision from the attorney general and the grand jury on the case. We'll be monitoring today the Rochester City Council, and they'll have a special meeting regarding the death of Daniel Prude, and it will focus on the independent investigation and the response by the city police and officials. And we also have the Georgia man that was seen on video being brutally beaten by the sheriff's deputies. Will hold a press conference at some point today where he talks about his numerous injuries and the medical issues he's facing. His girlfriend will also be there. She's the one who shot the video. And that's where we start domestically today.
Thank you very much, Laura. International.
So Richard may have more on the TikTok WeChat story. The Commerce Department now plans to restrict access to those two apps in the US. And just to mention that Selena Wang is available from Hong Kong. She's very well versed in both these companies, and so she can get into that as needed. And outside of that, just a couple of other stories. Saudi Arabia has announced $200 million in aid funding to UN agencies operating in Yemen. That comes just days after NEMA's investigation revealed the devastating impact of funding cuts by the US, the UAE and Saudi Arabia to humanitarian organizations in the country. So she'll be up and covering that on our shows today for us. And then lastly, just one story we're watching. Taiwan Taiwan scrambled fighter jets and deployed their missile defense systems today after a dozen Chinese aircraft entered the island's airspace. Tensions are really escalating between these two countries, especially as the U.S. makes more overtures to Taiwan in the last few days. The U.S. Undersecretary of Economic Affairs is heading to Taipei this weekend to attend a funeral, but the closer that the U.S. gets to Taiwan, the more jittery that China gets, and the tensions are really ratcheting up. So we'll be keeping an eye on that and looking into that for next week. That's it.
Good. Thank you, Mike. Business.
Yeah, as Mike mentioned, breaking this morning, the Commerce Department announcing that it would ban U.S. business transactions and downloads from Chinese-owned social apps like WeChat and TikTok starting on this Sunday. Wilbur Ross this morning on Fox Business, though, playing it down a bit, saying existing TikTok users can continue to use the software but can't update the app. And obviously, this announcement comes after the president was expected to announce whether or not the government will approve a deal for Oracle to take the minority stake in TikTok and become a trusted technology partner. Still unclear if the Commerce Department's announcement means there's no possibility of a deal going through before the deadline. We continue to be all over that. Brian Fung is up and available. That's where we start.
Great. Thank you. Okay, the rest of Washington, please.
Okay, so as you mentioned on the Ray situation from yesterday, Trump attacking him overnight for what he testified yesterday, when he talked about Russia. He said, Trump saying, what about China? And also just to note, this Ray also knew about how Antifa is more an ideology than an organization. So just the Trump response to all of that overnight. On the bar story that was so much a focus yesterday, Evan and team are working on some more reporting that we hope to have later today about what the heck is going on over there. And then I just want to mention the latest stir the base from the president, which is this National Commission to promote pro-American curriculum. The federal government, it is worth noting, has absolutely no power over what is taught in local schools. But in this very out there speech yesterday, he brought that up. And that's and David's got all the politics.
Okay, we'll get to the politics in a second. I think all three things you mentioned are worthy, today and through the weekend. Just, Trump's attempt on the history and the way we teach history, as Cynthia and others have been telling us for several weeks now. This is, this is what happens in dictatorships when they try to teach history. I do think that the Ray story on the FBI, both on Russia and his coming out saying that Russia is interfering and is the biggest threat, and they're trying to help Biden, contradicts completely what Trump and Barr and others have said about China being the biggest threat and trying to downplay Russia. I think what he said about Antifa, incredibly important, and Trump's attack on Ray, who clearly would not survive into a second Trump administration. We should be doing a segment on Ray and everything he said. And then I think as far as Barr goes, we should be doing a step back piece on just Barr as a whole and just how incredibly partisan he has become. I know we talk about this every day, but take this week in concert with everything, and there's just a big step back piece to be done on Barr. Let me open it up for anybody else and thoughts on any topics.
Hey, Jeff, Ben here. We're doing a human interest story on farm workers out west that have been affected by the fires. These are people that live marginally in trailers, uneducated. Some of them have illegal status and are afraid to get help. So tell their stories on these fires, the impact this is having on their lives. So we'll have that content that we could share with y'all. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, politics.
Good morning. So, obviously, on COVID, you saw that Biden just continued to hammer away at Trump in our town hall last night, repeating that line that he knew and he didn't do anything and it's merely criminal. He laid into his lack of leadership on this issue, and said he should be stepping down. And of course, saying that he would be straight with the American people if he were president. In addition to the COVID stuff, just what you were saying off of the Ray stuff, having Biden describe Russia as an opponent and China as a competitor, that the difference in the way he sees those and his portrayal of himself as extraordinarily tough on Russia, not showing his cards, but saying that, there would be consequences and they would be real on day one. He would immediately be taking on Putin for election interference or what have you, not revealing exactly how he would be doing that, but as serious as a delivery as he had about sort of saying that he would take them on and trying to use that as a contrast, obviously, with Trump as well. Remember, Dan Coates in the Woodward book and what have you. The frame that Biden put on the whole sort of campaign last night of Scranton versus Park Avenue, the notion of not just the economics of that, but an entire sort of worldview of what that means, and trying to separate Donald Trump into, an elitist and an upbringing that is not actually in touch with the people who are a significant part of the president's base, and that Joe Biden is trying to dig into some. In fact, if you look at the bulk of Joe Biden's post-convention travel, whether it was Macomb County last week and sitting down in a CNN interview with Jake, or the Scranton Town Hall last night. Today he's going to head to Duluth, Minnesota, where they start early voting. This is somebody who is trying to clearly fight Donald Trump on that turf of white working class voters across that critical Midwest region as part of his path to 270, as part of what he thinks would be a successful Biden coalition. And I think that's what you saw in that Scranton versus Park Avenue frame that he put on last night. We've been talking, obviously, on this call. Virginia mentioned early voting in a bunch of places. We are moving into that place now in the calendar where this is moving into sort of turbocharge in terms of starting today, Minnesota, Virginia, South Dakota, but in the days ahead, over the course of the next week or two, so many more states are coming online now in terms of the voting process really beginning, just as we are, 11 days away or so from that first debate. So this election is happening now. Voters are engaged in it now. And that's why you'll see both Trump and Biden in Minnesota there today. We expect to see Biden about 3:45 p.m. Eastern there. Jessica Dean is out in Duluth with Biden. I'll leave that there. The other note that I wanted to make is that Bloomberg, that $100 million in Florida money that he has promised to infuse into the campaign to help Joe Biden in Florida and sort of free him up to allow his campaign to also focus on other priorities. That spending we begin to see today in the form of the Priorities USA Super PAC ad that is using that Bloomberg money in Florida. It's an ad all COVID-based, just does that whole timeline thing again of everything Donald Trump said throughout the course of the last 6 or 7 months, with all the case number and death number increases along the way as he's saying those things, culminating with that line in the Rose Garden about not taking responsibility. So that Bloomberg effort begins in earnest today in Florida. And then just the latest round of state polls out from New York Times Siena this morning, looking at Arizona, North Carolina, and Maine. You see Biden leading in Arizona over the president. You see a basically tied up battle in North Carolina and Biden well ahead in Maine. Obviously, also these three states have three critical Senate races for battle control in the Senate, where you see the Democrat ahead of the Republican incumbent in Arizona and North Carolina, and it's a within margin of error race in Maine, but the Democrat numerically ahead there, Thurgoodian of Susan Collins. So it just shows you the Democrats are on the march here in the battle for control of the Senate as well. And I think that's where we start.
Thank you, David. Let me open it up for thoughts on politics. Anyone on politics?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that for shows that are still talking about the Pence deputy who came out yesterday that we've reported a lot, I would recommend that we also include, as we have been, General Kellogg's interview with Wolf that was so tough and so unequivocal regarding the fact that he's been in every meeting she's been in, and he didn't hear anything regarding shaking hands the way she said she did. And I just think it's important that we provide that kind of counter, which is a little different than just a statement from the White House, because he did come on our air and we did make that case.
Yep. And he's welcome to come back again. Anyone else? I do think that, to David's point, I think our analysis on Biden coming out as Scranton Joe versus Park Avenue Trump, although it's Fifth Avenue Trump, but nonetheless, same point, is that should really be the focus of our political analysis today, that with Biden going to Minnesota today and really going after the white working class vote that cuts into Trump's vote. We spend a lot of time on this call talking about Biden's outreach to minority voters, but this is really, David has pointed this out and is very strong on this. If you look at where Biden has been campaigning and this new approach and this new theme, it's really about cutting into the white working class voter strength of Trump, and that's, I think, where our analysis should be today.
Hey, Jeff, in that same vein, I think it would be a good idea to start a regular ad watch segment, because these ads are running. We know Biden spent an extraordinary amount of money this week in battleground states, and Trump is also spending in battleground states in huge numbers on digital. And anybody can see the digital ads, although some of them are targeted to specific areas, so they have local targeting even in the digital ads in terms of their geographic distribution. But I do think that all these ads that are running in the battleground states that the people that don't live in battleground states aren't seeing are worth taking a look at. I saw last night or yesterday during the day, one of our digital pieces or one of our political team's checks on a Biden ad said that it was misleading. Some of the Trump ads are misleading. So I think both a reality check and also just a chance to see what they're saying, because as you note, a lot of the Biden ads that were launched this week, and David talked about this, I think, earlier in the week, are targeted towards the exact people you're talking about, the white voters in that Trump did really well with last time, whether it's about jobs or manufacturing or healthcare. They're very targeted towards those groups. There's also ads that are in Spanish that are targeted towards Latinos. But I just think it would be helpful to us to have a regular look at these ads, fact checks on them, but also just to see what the messages are.
That would be great. I agree. Hey, David, do you want to comment on? I know you believe that that in the end this is going to come down to those white working class voters. Do you want to just make a comment on that?
Sure. I mean, listen, it's not exclusively, right? As all these things in politics, it's both and, not either or. Biden obviously needs real big turnout in the sort of core pieces of the Obama coalition of African American votes and Latino votes and young people. He needs all of that. But as we slice and dice the electorate, and we talk a lot about demographics here, it seems where he is really potentially making a difference and could win the election on is what his appeal is right now with white voters specifically, and more specifically older voters as well, older voters. But it is if indeed Joe Biden wins the White House, it's not going to look exactly like the Obama coalition. I know a lot of Democrats say, oh, he just needs to recreate the Obama coalition. If he wins the White House, it's going to be the Biden coalition. And that coalition is going to look whiter and older, most likely, than the Obama coalition did, and yet still potentially be successful for Joe Biden. So I do think it's, and as you're talking about, you see it in this travel, you see it in the advertising that Michael's talking about. I do think that has been a clear focus from the campaign as well. Again, not to ignore the importance of the youth vote, the minority vote, all the different, it all has to be put together in a way that works. But we shouldn't lose sight of that the fact that the Biden coalition could be a successful one and look different than the last successful Democrat. That's all.
I do think that our post-game analysis should be about, post-town hall analysis should be about that today. Any other thoughts before we move to digital? Digital.
Hey, good morning. We had 28.4 million yesterday, 4 pieces over 1 million uniques. The former Penn State who assailed Trump's coronavirus response was our top piece, followed by a right on the coronavirus second wave in Europe, a bacterial outbreak after a factory leak in China, and a right on parents who sent their child to school knowing the student was infected with the virus. So far this morning, Stephen Collins' analysis on last night's town hall with the headline, Biden shows the qualities Trump lacks, is out as our top story. Over 11,000 concurrents in that one. And Collinson gets into and builds out the Scranton versus Park Avenue pitch from last night. Our takeaways from the town hall is also doing very well. Followed by the U.S. ban on WeChat and TikTok downloads with over 10,000 concurrents. And an Alaska dentist who extracted a patient's tooth on a hoverboard is sentenced to 12 years in jail, rounds out our top 3. Elsewhere on coronavirus, we're ready for when deaths in the U.S. cross 200,000. We have a headline on the controversial CDC testing guidance that was published outside normal review process. And we have a few personal stories coming today, something we've seen audience connecting more with, and also keeping a focus on Europe and what's happening there with the numbers going in the wrong direction. Big news this morning, the TikTok and WeChat ban. We're looking to get out exactly what is going to happen to the apps in the U.S. That'll be a good interest piece for our audience. On the wildfires, we have a piece out looking at a much-needed break in the weather that can help, but still other fires are prompting even more evacuations, and we'll stay on all the latest there. And a sad headline that just published, a firefighter lost his life in the California fires that was started by the gender reveal party. On the election, we're keeping prominent our Biden town hall content this morning, and we have a really excellent package on voting and the election. All of our explanatory content, that's for experts database, the election center, our voter guide, has been pulled together in one place, cnn.com/election101. And we'll have the first version of a reader Q&A on voting today that will continue to build out with video and other features as we move toward election night and beyond. And lastly, just to flag that the Politically Sound podcast hosted by David Chalian and Mia Malika Henderson is about the politicization of science, connecting the dots between COVID and climate change with a special audio essay from Bill Weir. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Christina. John. Thank you, Christina. John, Dayside?
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Great. So we're going to be bundling all these fresh headlines, which just round out a week that underscored the raw politicization of COVID. Out front will be Dr. Gupta's fresh reporting that matches what the New York Times had on the CDC testing guidance and the political pressures there. And that dovetails with the Washington Post reporting on the plan to nix the distribution of the face masks. We'll handle that out of the White House with John Harwood, and also get into what the former Pence aide had to say. And all this is in the shadow of quickly marching to that 200,000 very grim milestone of deaths, which will most likely hit this weekend. Next hour, HHS Secretary Azar has some sort of announcement. We're listening in with a healthy dose of skepticism. We have former CDC Director David Satcher, Dr. Leanna Wen, Dr. Sarah Bedard on the dangers of undermining the CDC and the health experts. Lisa Lair from the New York Times just had a really sharp takeout about the decline in confidence of a COVID vaccine. She said it should come as no surprise if you've been listening to Trump over the past couple of weeks and few months. Some other domestic whips that we're getting into, Bianca Ladriga on the college cluster angle, most notably what we're seeing in Providence College, Carolyn Mano on the Chiefs and the fan that tested positive, and now other fans are quarantining. John King has the Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont, very worried about a spike in his state of cases, and he's already questioning if this is a Labor Day spike that health experts warned us about. On the education piece, we have a Broward County teacher union rep to answer to the new study that we reported late yesterday. 51% of all school employees are at increased risk of COVID because of pre-existing health concerns and their age. And the other side of the schools argument, we do have the head of Baltimore City Schools on that huge digital divide we're seeing there, thousands of students not getting online, and what that means for their future when they're not getting the education they should be getting. Internationally, Oren Lieberman on the lockdown beginning in Israel again, just as Rosh Hashanah gets underway, and Dave Culver with his outgoing U.S. ambassador interview. It is a big focus on Minnesota in the 2020 race with both Trump and Biden going there. Jessica Dean will be hitting her all day ahead of his appearance at 3 o'clock and watching his outreach to the working class there. John King has the Minnesota Secretary of State. It's one of the many states today that are beginning early voting. And then we have Kristen Holmes in Virginia to keep underscoring the early voting piece of all of this. Pam Brown on the fallout of the Postal Service ruling. We have Max Boot booked to do a big takeout segment on everything Ray had to say during that testimony yesterday and Trump attacking him. And we do have Nikki Hannah-Jones joining us again. She's a creator of the 1619 Project to answer directly to Trump's criticism about her project yesterday. Paul Verkaman on the Western wildfires and the firefighter killed from the fire sparked in the gender reveal party. Stephanie Elam has a couple of Emmy sponsorships. And we round out the week of Champions for Change with the piece at 2 o'clock on Brianna's show.
Thank you, John. Washington.
Good morning. Caitlin will pick up at 4 o'clock with Donna from the White House, and Mary Trump joins us for the latest on Uncle Donald. Erica Hill with a COVID wrap, and Sanjay, of course, will get into the new CDC guidelines, increases in cases, T-cells versus antibodies. Jessica Dean on Scranton Joe in Minnesota, and Harry Ann looks at the latest polling data. We get Julie Chatterley on with the latest economic business news, and we are going to stay on fires, of course.
And in the Situation Room, we'll be following COVID from both the political side and the public health front. So on the politics, we'll get into the CDC guidelines being rewritten in conjunction with this stop down on a plan to distribute thousands of masks back in April. All of that on the heels of this latest Pence aide to call out the president and this consistent narrative around the administration playing politics with the virus. On the public health side, we'll watch for this AZAR announcement that's expected at 10 o'clock and see what that is. As we near 200,000 deaths, with 30 states now trending up. So we're seeing this shift back in the wrong direction. We'll follow on schools and this study looking at who's at risk. This is New York is pushing back their start date. We'll look at the poll on public trust in vaccines and dig more into Fauci's comments about the flu and COVID this fall. Could the flu possibly not be as prevalent as we thought? So we'll get into all of that with the Nick Watt and Erica Hill wrap pieces and our doctors. Internationally, we'll follow on the WHO warning about Europe and cover the second lockdown underway in Israel. Out of Washington, we'll get into Trump versus Ray and this attempt to shift the focus away from Russia to China. And we'll take the step back look at Barr and what's going on there. We'll be looking for that new reporting we're expecting from Evan and see if that can further the story. And on politics, we'll watch Biden in Minnesota on the heels of last night's town hall. Trump also headed there as voting is getting underway in the state. And we'll take this broader look at the tale of two candidates, Scranton Joe versus Fifth Avenue Trump. And that's where we're starting.
Thank you, Emily. Does anybody else have any thoughts about day before we move to the weekend?
Yeah, Jeff, it's been very quickly. So HHS sold their telebriefing this morning as a major policy announcement, but Tammy Luby just got the release for it, and it is a new model of care for Medicare beneficiaries with chronic kidney disease and a new payment model to improve care for cancer patients. So they really oversold it, it seems. We will obviously have someone on the call just to see if anything else comes up, but I would say to everybody, don't hold your breath for this.
Thanks, Ben. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I have one. Is that, go ahead, David.
No, I was just coming back to the Barr thing. I mean, the thing I was thinking when I was watching Ray is what he is saying and what Barr is saying both cannot possibly be true. And to sort of do a side-by-side of the remarks about Russia versus China, Antifa and BLM, and maybe even expand it to the CDC director's comments on masks versus Barr's. And I think what Barr has emerged is essentially he's a propagandist. It's not even that he's partisan. And I think framing it that way might be a way into what's happened to him or how he's evolved, so to speak.
I totally agree, and I would recommend that, some of our primetime shows really produce that out the way David is describing it, and, not just talk about it, but really take the tape of all these guys and produce it. Rick?
Yes. Back in May of 2019, Donald Trump tweeted, "Why didn't President Obama do something about Russia in September before the November election when told by the FBI he did nothing and had no intention of doing anything?" We are now in September before the November election. And I would recommend we take this tweet. Jeremy Diamond had a story back then about this whole tweet. And here we have the FBI telling us in congressional hearing exactly what Trump was saying Obama didn't do anything about. And he is ignoring it. And, that whole thing about there's always a tweet, I would recommend on this day that we go back and take that May 1st, 2019 tweet by Donald Trump and raise it as something that is obvious that he should be doing what he's saying Obama didn't do, and tie it together.
Totally a really good observation and point. And I think just like David's point about Barr, we should absolutely be doing that. Again, I think our primetime shows, some of them, we should be looking at that. Thank you, Rick. Other thoughts? Okay, then let's move to the weekend, please, and start with Smerconish.
Good morning, Jeff. So Mike will have a commentary on the big story of PA this week, the court decision to extend the deadline for those absentee ballots, and how we all know this already with all these mail-in ballots. We need to prepare for not getting election results on November 3rd. Bloomberg plays into this as well. He's investing in Florida. He thinks that Biden can put away Florida, make it harder for Trump to claim victory on election night, hopefully avoiding chaos. So let me start there. And if you look at everything that's happened in the last year, we went from a good economy to impeachment, the pandemic, George Floyd killings, protests, civil unrest, Trump's former national security advisor saying he's not fit for office, Goldberg's Atlantic article, Woodward's book. But you know what? Good or bad, the numbers just don't change. Real Clear Politics said Biden at 50% and Trump at 43% last October. And a year later, it means virtually unchanged. We have Ron Braunstein on this. And in the battleground states, everyone says like, oh, so-and-so is going to win because look at all the yard signs. Yard signs are everywhere. That's telling. But do these tell us anything about who's really going to win? What's the impact of yard signs? This has actually been studied, and we have the professor who did it, Donald Green from Columbia. And then last, we have, should private companies be able to require their employees to return to the office? We have a labor and employment attorney on that. That's where we start.
Thank you, Catherine. A reminder, we have our Champions for Change special Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And then we'll move to Sunday and start with Inside Politics.
We have Dr. Jha and Dr. Rani marking this weekend's grim 200,000 milestone as we get into the trend lines, the CDC and face mask reporting, vaccine polling, and Fauci on the flu, Trump's version of reality, many times clashing with his own administration, on COVID, on science, on the election, and on history with historian Douglas Brinkley and former GOP Congresswoman Mia Love. and the path to 270 in the COVID election, plus Biden's working class voter pitch with Josh Jossi and Asma Khalid. And we'll talk to climate scientist Catherine Hayhoe about the realities of the West Coast fires and this busy hurricane season. And that's where we start.
Thank you very much. State of the Union.
Hey there. We're still working on our top guests and hopefully should have something to announce shortly. We do have Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, so we'll talk to her about the latest on COVID. Trump obviously called out her state this week, saying it needs to get open. And we'll get her reaction to everything that we've learned recently about what the president knew early on about the virus and how that might have made a difference to states like hers. We'll also talk to her about the election and how she's preparing, and she's calling on Congress to do another stimulus, so we'll talk to her about that. Jake is also taping a special segment for the end of the show with Jon Stewart, Senator Kristen Gillibrand, and the wife of a veteran, Rosie Torres, about an important new initiative that they have to fight for veterans exposed to toxic burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we'll do that at the end of the show, and should hopefully have our top guest soon.
Okay. GPS.
Thank you, Jeff. Bob Woodward will be live with Fareed Sunday morning to talk about Trump's unusual friends around the world, Putin, Xi, Kim, Erdogan, and many more. He has great insight into why Trump wants to be pals with these guys from his interviews and his reporting. With the White House having brought Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE together this week to sign what they call a peace plan, we'll have the top editor of UAE's main newspaper, Mina Al-Arabi, to talk about how it looks from there. And with the West Coast on fire and the world experiencing more heat as climate change worsens, we tackle the question of how climate's going to change where Americans and people around the world live. In 2070, 20% of the world will be uninhabitable. Abraham Lustgarten has a cover story in this weekend's New York Times Magazine, and had another one in July. He will join Fareed.
Okay. Reliable sources.
All right, we're going to get into how Trump's war on science is being waged by his loyal foot soldiers like Laura Ingraham and the rest of the pro-Trump media. We have former Washington Post executive editor Len Downey to help make sense of everything that's going on. We're going to put together a panel of international journalists on how all this that's going on in this country is being viewed outside of the world. And we have Nicole Hannah-Jones talking about Trump's attack on the 1619 Project.
Okay, does anybody else have anything they want to bring up? Any final thoughts? Okay, I just want to encourage, again, like I began, big picture context. Take a step back. Science, politics, the politicization of science, and these two things we've just learned today, Barr and who he's become and the way David Vigilante laid it out, Ray and all of Ray's warnings, Rick Davis's very insightful observation about Trump's tweet, all of this, and then obviously all of the news of the day, especially on so much going on COVID. Have a good day, everybody. A good weekend. Stay safe. We'll see you Monday. Bye-bye.